Well, welcome to the 8th screencast on the DPS tools in Adobe InDesign. This will actually wrap up, or be the capstone, so to speak, of the first series of screencasts on the DPS tools. And today we're going to talk about the Folio Builder. Now, all the previous screencasts, and if you haven't looked at them, please go ahead and go check them out now. But all the previous screencasts have talked a little bit about how to actually set up some interactivity inside of InDesign for use on things like iPads and iPhones and Kindles and Android devices. And throughout this, we've talked a little bit about how to test how to test your articles on mobile devices. But what we haven't really discussed is a little bit about the terminology and exactly what these folios are. How do you actually create them? It's great that you can test them, but how do you take multiple documents that you've put together and how do you kind of combine them into this one major document that you can then store on your iPad? And the first thing is that we're going to create what is called a folio. Now, throughout this, we've dealt with the overlays, which is down here, the folio overlay window, which is fine. Today, we're actually going to talk a little bit about the folio builder, which, as its name suggests, allows you to actually build a folio. Now, a little bit about the terminology that I'm going to be using in this particular screencast, and I've used the term article in the previous screencast, and I probably have not done a good enough job explaining what I mean by that. To start off with, anytime you're creating one of these digital publications, it's going to be viewed on a mobile device. Let's say an iPad. That way I don't have to go through the list of them every single time I explain them. But let's say an iPad. If you're going to create a digital publication for an iPad, what you're actually doing is that you're building what is called a folio. Now, InDesign already has a folio option. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a print folio. In this case, this is a DPS folio. Now, originally, this is what you would normally think in terms of print when you're creating a magazine, as you're building an issue, okay, right, a publication issue. Unfortunately, as was related to us by one of the InDesign developers, they couldn't actually call this issue builder, which of course would be terms that all of us are familiar with. And the reason for that is that as they sent this build off to the group at Adobe, who kind of proofs everything and checks everything, they came back and they said, well, you can't possibly call this issue builder. And they said, why not? And with a straight face, they said, well, there are no such thing as issues in our software, so we don't have issues in our software. Okay, so they had to change the name to Folio. So whenever we say Folio, just think of it as it's a collection of InDesign documents, just like you would have a collection of articles that create an issue in the print world. We're creating InDesign documents, individual InDesign documents as articles, and we're collecting them and we're putting them inside of a folio. So we're going to use the Folio Builder panel for this. Now, to get started with this, you obviously need to have some folios that you've created. And to do that, we actually have been creating these folios within the screencast. So I have 5 of them here, excuse me. The audio article that we created, the video, the slideshow, the button, and the web content. And you can see how I created these by going back to some of the previous screencasts that are in my channel. So what we're going to do is each of these individual InDesign documents is essentially considered an article. So if you were thinking in terms of, say, a traditional magazine layout, you may think of things like, say, the cover. That would be an article. The main page with the menu, or maybe some of the features, just kind of giving a summary of what the entire issue is going to have, that would be an article. Maybe you have a letter from the editor. That would be an article. Maybe you have an ad, a full page ad. That would be an article. So each of these need to be created as individual InDesign documents. So if I was creating a full-blown digital publication, I may end up with a couple dozen articles, depending on ads, or how many actual content articles I have, or subsections, or things like that, cover pages, things along those lines. So each of these are individual InDesign documents, and they are considered articles. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually add them to a folio. So we're going to create one digital publication. We're going to create a folio. So to get started here in InDesign, we're going to go ahead and click on the Folio Builder panel. Now, once again, if you don't have Folio Builder up, you can find it under Window, and it's there, Folio Builder. Now, If you notice, as it was coming up, you had a little spinning loading and it says signing in. If you have an Adobe CC account, it's going to ask you to log. First time you click on this, it's going to ask you to log into your Adobe account. You're using your Adobe ID, and here's the main point. The reason why it's going to ask you to do this. Folios, when you create folios, it actually creates what's called a .folio file. But here's the rub: you can't actually save that .folio file in a separate path. In other words, if you have like a flash drive or external hard drive, you can't tell InDesign that you want to save that .folio file somewhere else. .folio files only exist in one of two places. Number one, you can upload it to the cloud, so your Adobe account, which is exactly what these have done. Or you can create what's called an offline folio. And an offline folio is actually stored on your computer, but it's stored in a very specialized location that you don't have access to. So you need to make sure that if you are using a public computer, that if you are building folios, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and sign in to your Adobe account and make sure that all the folios that you create are stored on the cloud. That way the person, another individual who's using that computer after you does not have access to that folio. But to get started, we're going to create a folio. So to do that, let me bring this up here. I'm going to come down here to the very bottom, and I've got a new folio button. So I'm going to create a new folio. And this is the new folio window. Let me close this. There we are. And I'm going to give it a name. So whatever name I'd like for it to be. So I'm just going to call this DPS demo. There we go. It's going to ask you to choose a viewer version. Now, what this basically means is throughout the entire screencast, if you notice, we've been using the desktop viewer app. And in fact, if you remember, when we talked about side loading, there's a separate viewer app that you would download on your iPad. The version of that iPad version of the viewer app is what it's asking you. Which version do you want to support? I think currently it's sitting at version 31. And of course, just like if any of you remember Flash development, if any of you did any Flash development, you could, depending on which version of Flash you wanted to support, you had different functionality and different, action script that you can support and things along those lines. Same thing goes here with the viewer version. I just usually leave it alone at viewer version number 26. That seems to kind of be a good catch-all, and that's what I'm going to use. Next, I can choose what the target device for my publication is. So in this case, I've been building articles for the Apple iPad, so I'm going to choose that. And I'm going to make sure that I need to choose the right orientation. So this is where that alternative layout can kind of come into play. Now, if you remember going all the way back to the third screencast that I did on alternative layouts, I took the layout that we did in the second screencast on audio, and I converted it to both horizontal and vertical layout. If every single one of your articles has alternative layouts, you can go ahead and choose both orientations. However, if all of your articles only have horizontal or all vertical, you need to make sure you choose one of those other two options. Now in our case, the articles that I saved are all horizontal layouts, so I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I choose that this is a complete horizontal layout. Next, default format PDF. There are three different options that you have here. You can choose JPEG, PNG, PDF. Of course, you can choose automatic. And now this deals with how the content should be rendered in the viewer and how the folio is going to be created. So is it going to, you remember when I was talking about in our previous screencasts, that static content is essentially going to be flattened and placed in the background. Is that content going to be saved as JPEG, as PNG file, or as PDF? Now, for the scope of this particular demo, or the screencast, I'm not really going to go into the technicalities of these three particular options, but needless to say, JPEG gives you some compression, PNG file doesn't give you compression, it's a little bit better quality. PDF tries to straddle both worlds and kind of gives you some additional functionality. So for right now, I would just suggest, for the time being, unless you really want to get into tweaking your folio at a very high level, just leave it as PDF for the time being. The cover preview. So think of these as like little thumbnails. If you've ever actually looked at a digital publication on a device like, say, an iPad or an iPhone, the app, like the newsstand app, for instance, that Apple has, when you go to it, it's kind of built around, skeuomorphism. It kind of has this nice, shelf that looks like a wooden shelf and things like that. And the publications have little thumbnails, little icons essentially, and that's what this is asking for. If you want to create these particular little cover art for your publication. Now, in our case, I'm not going to create these, but if you do create them, rule of thumb is that they need to be the exact same size as the target device. So in this case, the horizontal one needs to be 1024 by 768. The vertical one needs to be 768 by 1024. Now, it's important that if you're going to add a cover preview, and if I was doing this for real, I would, but if you're going to add a cover preview, you do both. Even if you're only choosing one orientation, always make sure you choose and create both cover previews. Okay, last step is, do I want to create this as an offline folio or do I want to upload this to the cloud? Well, I'm going to go ahead and create an offline folio today, and I'm going to click OK. Now, what it's now done is it's now created the DPS demo folio, and it has now moved on into what we call the article view. And the article view here lists all the articles that are in this folio. It's empty at the moment. If I click on this back button, I can go back to the folio view and see all the folios that I have currently set up. This folio that I just created has a little computer icon on it. That means it's an offline or a local folio. It's not on my cloud. This other one that I've created is in fact on the cloud. So I'm going to double click on the DPS folio, and now I'm back in my article view, and now I can add articles. Now, when you go to add articles, thankfully, this particular panel has these little tool tips down here. It says click the add article icon to add or import articles to your folio. That's helpful. If I click on this, if you notice, I have two options: add an open InDesign document and import article. Now, you may be tempted to choose import article because it's the only option available to you. But here's the thing, the import article function is very specialized. In other words, in order for you to use it, you need to have saved your InDesign documents in a very specific format in a very specific way. That's something we're going to get to in a separate screencast. So, especially when we talk about smooth scrolling articles, we'll talk about that later. That's not the option that we want to use here. What we really want to do is that we want to add an article, but we'll need to open it up first in InDesign, and we'll need to use the Add Open InDesign Document feature in order to add it to our folio. So to do this, we need to come back and go ahead and open up our DPS workshop folder, go to our finished articles, and I'm just going to open up all 5 of these articles that we've created. So I'm going to move to my first one, which is the audio article. And here in my folio builder, I'm going to click on Add Open InDesign Document. So now that I have that selected and I've chosen that option, it's going to want to know what's the name of the article. Well, I'll just call this John Coltrane. Now it's important to note that the article name is a reserved name inside of InDesign in the way that if you wanted to create a menu with buttons, and if you go back to the 6th screencast when I talked about buttons, if you want to create a button and you click on a button and you want it to go to a specific article, that button needs to reference this name. So if you know you're wanting that sort of functionality, that interactivity within your folio, you want to make sure you write down the name of each of your articles because you're going to need to reference them later. The format, once again, PDF, JPEG, or PNG file. I'll leave it as PDF. Smooth scrolling. We'll talk about smooth scrolling in a future screencast, but for right now we'll go ahead and leave it off. In other words, this particular article, if we have multiple pages, each page as we scroll down the page, it will snap into place, which is nice. So we'll click OK. It'll now add all of the assets for this article to our folio, and now we have a John Coltrane article. To add the second article, I'm just going to select it here in InDesign. There's the video article. Click Add Open InDesign Document, and we'll call this Gravity. Now that's added. Go to Slideshow, Add Open InDesign Document, Big Hero 6, click OK. It'll add all the assets to the article. This one takes a while. 21 images as a slideshow. There we go. Here's our fourth article for the button. We'll add that one. Call that one Declaration. Add that one to the folio. And finally the web content one. And on this one, if you followed the 7th screencast on this, I actually reverted this back to just loading Google. So I'll just call this Google. Add that one. There we go. So now I have my 5 articles inside of my folio. And just like with the object state window, if I want to rearrange these articles, I can by simply clicking and dragging these to the position that I want. Furthermore, while you're in the article view, so while you see each one of these articles, if I select one of these articles, I can click Preview, and it will open up the desktop viewer and allow me to preview this particular article inside of the desktop viewer. However, if I want to actually view the entire folio, what you need to do is you need to go back to the folio view, select the folio, and then click the Preview button. And you have 2 options. We can view it on the desktop or the iPad. But you know what? We have the iPad here. Let's go ahead and preview this on the iPad. It's going to prepare the folio content. It's going to load that up. It says loading preview up at the top of my iPad. There is my article. First article is the audio article. So I can swipe to the left to choose different articles. Notice I was able to swipe back on this one. If you saw our 5th slide, our screencast on creating the slideshow, I mentioned why I have this white border around it. If you don't know why, go back and take a look at that screencast. But I'm able to scroll through this. Now, each one of these articles, if you notice, the navigation is horizontal. So to go from article to article, you're swiping left or swiping right. If an article has multiple pages, you're going to swipe up or down to be able to do that. So one consideration, let's say if this one particular article had multiple pages to it, you may want to explain that or have some sort of a visual cue or an icon or just use some sort of iconography to let people know that, oh yeah, by the way, you can scroll down for more content here. It's a good tip. But let's test this, make sure this works. Okay, audio works just fine there on that one. And the video here should be full screen. And it is. In fact, if I tap this, I should now also be able to use the player on the iPad. There we go, that works. Slideshow, swiping through just fine. Go to the next one, button works. Okay, go to the next one. There's Google. Not bad. And that's it. That's all you need to do in order to create a folio inside of InDesign. Now, there is one other thing that you need to be aware of when you're actually creating these folios, and that is, let me go back here to the iPad real quick. If I tap this one area where it's not interactive and go back to my library, there it is, back to the library. You'll see this section over here. This is actually the new folio that's been built. Now, I don't have any cover preview, so you get this ugly looking icon instead. Also notice there's no description to this. There's no text to let you know, oh yeah, this is, what's the title of this publication. If you want to add or you want to define the name of the publication, if you go back here in the folio builder, and you're in the folio view. In other words, I'm not seeing all the articles that are in the folio, I'm just seeing all the folios that I've created. You select your folio, go to the menu, and what you want to choose is folio properties, excuse me. And from here, you have the ability to, of course, add any cover art that you've created, select a different viewer version, which is helpful if, say, you've tested this for a newer viewer or an older viewer version and some of your features aren't working. You can go in here and tweak that. But up here, you'll notice there's a publication name. So I'm just going to call this DPS Demo and click OK, and then re-preview this in my iPad. So there's my folio. If I go back now, DPS demo is now being displayed. So even though I don't have the cover preview, I now at least have some text to let me know exactly what this particular publication is. So that's it. That is the end of this first series on the DPS tools inside of Adobe InDesign. Once again, please go back and watch any of the previous 7 videos that I've created for this. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them below.